I do want to go into the idea of wisdom and share with you a little bit about how the Torah portion seems to understand wisdom and expand from there. When you look at the context of the Torah portion, the wise ones are those who have mastered some kind of technical craft. In Greek, it's called techne, which is a kind of knowledge. If you look at, for example, Aristotle, Plato, who are the first ones that I know of to really organize different kinds of knowledge, there's a knowledge called techne. But even when we think of technical knowledge, especially with woodwork, spinning work, by the way, spinning work, weaving is called choshev. It's amazing to me that the Hebrew language took the word for spinning cloth, maseh choshev, and used it as the word for thinking. Thinking itself is a kind of weaving. So I want you to always remember that the Hebrew word for thought is rooted in the Hebrew word for weaving. It's as if there's something in us that is constantly weaving a reality. So the images of people mastering technical skill is not simply the idea that someone knows how to do something, but I think in the ancient world, it was something almost mystical, that someone could take raw material, work on it, refine it, and create something of beauty. It's a bit breathtaking when you think about it, that the world is filled with, as it were, raw material, beautiful as it is in nature. And then there are some human beings who know how to take something in its, as it were, raw form, as beautiful as the raw form is, let's say wood, stone, etc. Find a way to make tools, apply the tools to the raw form, and create things of intentional, exquisite beauty. Now, not just function. It's really incredible to have a tool that works, by the way. I've been, as we're going through our various things that we're giving away, letting go of, and taking to Israel, I'm actually looking at all of our utensils in our kitchen. And I'm looking at our tableware. And I'm looking at how beautifully crafted the tableware is. I've never actually sat and looked at the curves and lines and the design of a knife or a fork, and I turn it over and I look at the stamp on the bottom. And just going through things and sorting through things, I'm aware of how much skill and artistry has gone into the simplest things that we own. But because there's been such an abundance of them, I don't think I've ever taken time and actually compared one knife to another, one fork to another, one spoon to another, taken dinner plates and turned them over and looking carefully at the design, even clothes. I know I had this one, as it were, workout jacket I used to wear, and I would wear it, throw it in the wash, wear it, throw it in the wash, and I looked at it recently saying, do I take it? Do I not take it? And I thought to myself, I've never realized how actually beautifully designed it is. And I started looking at the quadrants and the colors and so forth, that some human being actually sat down and put the black and the orange and the red and so forth. And it's an amazing thing when you look at what people design, even functional things, and make sure they're not just functional, that they all carry an imprint. And I'm going to maybe be extravagant a bit and say the imprint of the soul of another human being in the designing and so forth. So to say that in our Torah portion, Chacham Lev has a sense of techne, which means knows how to take raw material and turn it into something that is both functional and beautiful. I think the more we examine that, the more mystical it becomes, that behind techne is an extraordinary sense typically of both beauty and function and form, beauty, function, and form all together. You don't know it unless we have this moment of Shabbat, this moment of rest, and you actually observe and gaze into things. So as far as I know, by the way, the Hebrew Bible does not contain a word that we call skill. There are later Hebrew words. The modern Hebrew word for skill is miyumanut, from the Hebrew word le'amen, which means to train. Me'uman means trained, and there's a continued formation of a miyuman, trained, and miyumanut, skill. I use it when I translate wisdom work into Hebrew. But from what I can tell, the actual organic word in Hebrew for skill is Chacham, Chacham Lev. Now, I want to now expand things a little bit before I conclude for tonight and continue tomorrow. When we think about what a wise person is, there are so many distinctions we have to make. So, for example, I went to college and graduate school and rabbinical school, and I was around many, many profoundly knowledgeable professors. I was thinking in preparation for tonight, how many of them were wise? Knowledgeable, yes. Impressively knowledgeable. Gifted teachers, gifted pedagogues, knew how to pierce the inner dimension of an idea. And I thought to myself, well, who were the wise ones? I want you to all think for a moment, when you think about anybody you've ever studied with, any book you've ever read, where you would say, this is very wise. So I realized from my perspective, wisdom has several elements. I want to throw this out to you, and I also want to recommend something to you in honor of our Parsha this coming week. Ask your friends and family how they would define wisdom. Not I'm saying that there is a definition of wisdom, but it opens up a really interesting discussion, because I think one of the wisest things we can do is actually talk about wisdom. No discussing wisdom is going to be useless. Every time we discuss wisdom, I think we are on our way to become wiser people. So when I think of wisdom or a wise person, here now remember, I'm taking the idea of techne, of skillful in taking the raw and making it into the finished, the beautiful, the functional in a beautiful form. When I think of a wise person, it's as if some aspect of their intellect is brought to bear on a problem. Meaning wise people just don't repeat things. Wise people bring their knowledge and intellect to bear on something and apply it into the world. So when I think of wise people, first of all, or oftentimes when I think of a very unwise person, unwise people don't decide to master the facts about something that they care about. This becomes certainly pronounced during times of crisis for me. The issue with Israel, I have many people calling me that they've had a falling out with a friend, falling out with a family member, because they're posting outrageous, atrocious things. They say, how do I talk to this person? And I said, well, first of all, from what you're showing me, they're running on emotions. Other people have either supplied them with images and pseudo-facts that are fueling their emotions. The first thing to ask, I say to the person, are you in mastery of the facts? Don't just say, I need some facts from Finley. Because the first thing I'm going to say to you is, do you care enough to actually master the facts? Because if I say to people, if you don't master the facts, they're going to go to their handler and come back with something that's going to respond to the thing you said. And then you're going to, because I've had this before, and then you come back to me and says, well, you said this, now they said this. I'll just give you a tiny example. A person said, Israel's committing genocide. You've heard this in Gaza. I said, okay, so what's genocide? Well, no one knows. I said, I think it means the intentional eradicating of a race or an ethnic group. I think that's what it means, having taught Holocaust and genocide studies for 10 years. They say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Is Israel committing genocide in the Gaza Strip? I said, well, if you mean the intentional destruction of an entire people, then Israel's doing a very poor job of it. Because if Israel actually wanted to eradicate the Palestinian people, they would simply strafe and massacre the refugee camps until there's not one person alive. So since Israel is not doing that, it doesn't seem that they intentionally want to massacre every single person in the Gaza Strip. That would be called genocide. They said, okay, got it. Come back to me and said, I thought you said Israel's not bombing refugee camps, but there's a headline. I said, okay. Oi, my fault. I said, I never said that. In fact, if Hamas is hiding weapons in a refugee camp, the laws of warfare say you can attach that. But I realized this person did no homework. They just went back and repeated what I said. So I was dealing with a person who wanted information to fight propaganda that you can't do piecemeal. So then I said to the person, you really need to master this. You need to master what these words mean. You need to go, as I did, to the United Nations website and look at laws of war and then war crimes and memorize it. You need to scour everything and figure out as much as you can penetrate the propaganda that's coming through the mainstream press exactly what's happening, because one is able ultimately to discern some things, especially when things are attributed to Gaza Health Ministry, which means Hamas propaganda. So there is a way to do it. But one thing I realize is many people want to have an opinion, an informed opinion, but don't want to do the work to actually master the facts. So it seems to me that a person of wisdom will take the time to master the facts about things they care about. And the problem is we go through most of our lives actually not mastering facts outside of a hobby or our work. So I think if we are going to be people who fight for the truth in this very, very critical time on many levels, I'm going to start with our interpersonal relationships. Many people actually don't know much about relationships. People who are parents don't know very much about child psychology and child development. People don't know themselves. They don't know other people. So sometimes when I counsel people, what I realize is they know a lot about a hobby or a work or something like that, but they have very little self-knowledge and knowledge of the human condition. And I say, it's not very hard to find. It's not very hard to find a little bit about yourself, about the human condition, the nature of personalities. But so many people in trouble with other people, they actually know very little about humanity, which is odd. They're being human. You would think that would take up a considerable portion of their time. So one thing I recommend to all of you, if you care about the human experience, if you care about the human condition, find some way to master what it means to be human within yourself, with other people, including, as you can infer from everything I've taught, the practice of virtue, which is restraining the negative, understanding personality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I call this wisdom works. It really is work to master wisdom. So the first thing a person of wisdom ought to do, in my mind, what I'll call the techne of living well, the techne, the craft of an examined life, is master the facts of what you care about. If you care about being human, study being human. By the way, when I think about the further dimensions of wisdom work, we're working out an already too massive curriculum, but a very big part of it is, in my mind, the best books on the human condition. Okay, so I have one recommendation. Now, when I recommend this book, I'm going to date myself. So you younger people, if anybody has a camera on, I want you to watch the faces of people, let's say, over 60. And I want us over 60 to look at the faces of complete befuddlement by people under 60. Y'all ready for the first book on wisdom? The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. Yes? Yes? Okay. If you remember reading it, go read it again. I've been reading it again this week, and I thought to myself, I can't believe I don't read this book every year. It's so great. I'm in chapter 4, and I think to myself, I should study this like I studied Gomorrah. So if I was going to pick one place for a curriculum on human wisdom, I would pick M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled and his several other books. I remember, by the way, he wrote it he was a psychiatrist in Okinawa, so I already felt a kinship with him, having spent a year. I was not too far from where he was, and wow, what profundity! Every one of his books went further and further. So if you want to read one book on the human condition to start the discussion of the human condition, and I hope we develop this part of our curriculum for Wisdom Works, that's a great place to start. So much good insight on the human condition. The second thing, what is a wise person able to do? What does a person with wisdom do? I've said this many times before. I want to say it in one talk tonight, and that is, a person of wisdom can develop good theories from the knowledge base that they accrue. See, there are people who have doctorates in history. They know a lot of facts about history, but they can't draw conclusions to how it should be applied in our own time. Now, how do I know this? Because you could take a room filled with historians and completely disagree on what to do with that knowledge. That tells me the history might be some kind of a science, but applying history is not kind of a science, because there might be some kind of basic agreement. As you know from my teaching, a core thing that I believe about in the study of history is, if we don't assiduously protect the power of interpersonal reasoning and don't teach it as a skill, we all suffer. That's one thing I've learned from history. People might have a knowledge base. They might be able to collect theories, which means they're rational. If they don't know how to reason with other people, our theories are never tested. We don't know how to communicate them. And that's when I began to think about what wise people can do. Wise people can calmly and judiciously communicate the facts that they know, the theories that they have, to another person, listen well, and reason toward the truth. And the truth is more important than what they thought before the discussion began. When I see this happening in front of me, I remember when I was a young person and I would watch somebody and be so impressed. I remember when I was in my 20s and I sat in the presence of a well-known rabbi at the time, local rabbi, in his 80s. And he would talk to people as if he had heard these ideas for the first time. And I knew that he was wise, and I knew the things that I and others were mentioning to him were not the first time he heard, but he looked at it as if it was completely new to him. That we were saying things that I know he had thought of, but he went to beginner mind and gave each of us a really wonderful hearing. And then he asked questions where we became more intelligent under his questioning, and you could almost see him grow as he engaged in dialogue with us. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't think I've ever sat in the presence of a more wise person than a person for this great knowledge base and capacity to be rational and weave together good ideas, reason with others with beginner mind, dispense with all foregone conclusions, and you might say enter into human thought as a completely new frontier. Nothing is known. We're going to create knowledge together. That was one of my first deep experiences with the term wise person came to mind. So I want to offer that to you. First of all, a wise person never tires of discussing wisdom. I want to recommend to all of you, talk amongst yourself, talk among people you know, and say, what do you think wisdom is? And hear what everybody else has to say. I know I learn every time I ask people. Secondly, whatever you care about, I think you have a rich factual knowledge of what it is. Be able to devise coherent theories based on your facts. For example, during all of the awful things that we saw after the war broke out with the anti-Israel sentiments and the anti-Semitism, people said, "Aren't you disturbed by it?" I said, "I'm very disturbed by it, but more than interesting, I'm trying to understand how it happened." And I remember myself trying to figure out what are the things that have produced this phenomenon. And for me, that was actually more important than being angry, was understanding, developing from my knowledge base certain theories, testing them with other people, and then learning how to talk to other people. And I know when I had these conversations, again, quiet, judicious, the Socratic method of, may I ask you a question? I mean, you just made a statement. May I ask you some questions about this? And for a person to stop and say that's a really good question. I've never thought about it. No one ever asked me that question. And coming out away with certain people that we had to have an argument. Person's very hurt, very disturbed, and I think because I can reason well, had to know things that made them very sad. Had them know things that made them very sad, that the opinions that they had gathered did not stand the test of gentle, loving, reasoning scrutiny. The last thing I want to say about that is I think a wise person understands the consequences of their thoughts, feelings, speech, and behavior. There are many people who think in a very opinionated way, but they don't understand the consequences of their thinking. They actually don't know what it means. For example, when people say, Gaza free from the river to the sea, I would say, okay, so what exactly does it mean? And aside from a slogan you yell to join a club, I really get that. I mean, slogans are great ways of social identification. And a person says, yeah, you're right, I see what it means, I don't believe it, I probably shouldn't say it. No, that's There's a kind of a Menschlichkeit there. But when a person realizes, if you mean free of Jews, you need to own what you're saying, because free of Jews actually does mean genocide, and therefore you're advocating war. Are you actually advocating war? Because Israelis are not going to pack their bags and go anywhere. They're going to fight. So are you advocating war? And who's going to conduct this war? And will you conduct this war? Or you want someone else to die for your slogan, Palestine free from the people to see? And I've never met one person who actually thought it through more than 3 steps. They're just not accountable to their thinking. So one thing is, the stronger your opinions, the less defensible they might be, because I think thoughts of truth cannot be contained in slogans. I just think it's impossible. So if you're thinking in a slogan, whatever your slogan is, say, oh, okay, it's a good rhetorical device. They're quick-witted and they put down the other side and they prop up your side. I really understand slogans. I've probably used a few in my life. But they're actually, not only are they not thinking, they're antithetical to thinking. So understand the consequences of your slogans. As attached as you are, we probably shouldn't use them unless they're benign. Like, let's all think better. I don't think there's a downside to that slogan. I don't think it's going to win any prizes or create a political party, but I think it's an okay slogan as slogan goes. And then also our feelings. Oftentimes in my counseling practice, a person would have a very strong feeling. I said, let's take if feelings are drives toward action, right, and the feeling is there until the action is accomplished and the feeling is extinguished like a desire, what's the end point of the feeling? And many people never ask themselves, what's the end point of my feeling? They just have the feeling. And oftentimes the end point of a feeling is something terrible, something destructive. So the consequences of thoughts, even the theoretical consequence of a thought, of a feeling, certainly of speech and behavior. Now, I know many people, when they look back on things they've done, I've shared with you that I think one of the greatest paths to wisdom is regret. Because when you sit down and look at things that you've done that you knew weren't right, either weren't right for you, or actually you have remorse, which means you hurt somebody and you hurt a relationship. One of the best things we can do is ask ourselves, what was I thinking when that happened? When I allowed myself to do that or say that, what was my thinking process? Because you were thinking something. Something was going on. That the conclusion of that thinking process was something that you now regret after the fact. In fact, Rabbi, there's a saying in the Talmud that is a chacham, in a more obscure passage, haro'eh et hanolad, the person who can see what's going to be born, meaning born of our thoughts, feelings, speech, and behavior. So for me, wisdom has a few parts. One of them is rich factual knowledge of whatever you care about. Take time to master the factual basis. The ability to create good theories out of your rich factual knowledge about yourself and other people. I'll call that being rational. Rational all the way to getting to the truth of the matter. I think for me, I'm using reasoning in one small sense here. Reasoning means the capacity to communicate what you know, your knowledge base and your rational conclusions with another person. And remember, reasoning always means being corrected by another reasoning person, which is by, I think, from our Talmudic tradition and the Greek tradition, one of the greatest things we can do as human beings is actually reason with other people who are willing to reason. It's a true gift. Not many people know how to reason or are willing to reason. It's a real gift to be able to test what you know and think with another person. I think that's where great wisdom comes in. And on the other side, I'm just summing up, I think what a wise person can do is truly understand the consequences of what they think, feel, speak, and do. They understand the consequences of it, and they are courageous enough to go into the past and look at things that they regret, meaning I wish I would have done something other, or for which have remorse, meaning I hurt somebody or hurt a relationship. Had I been wiser, I would not have done it, and truly plumb the depths of what was happening in you where that seemed to be the right thing. So all these elements together, I think for me, create some concept of wisdom that I'm working on, especially as we're working toward formalizing our upcoming Wisdom Institute. Okay, that's the end of my teaching for tonight, and I'm, of course, interested in hearing if anybody has their own questions about anything that I've shared tonight. Well, I mean, the term sophomoric is actually an insult. We use it. It means a wise moron. So, which is, kind of characterizes people. We say in the Marine Corps, when you get your efficiency report, it says this young Marine has a vast enthusiasm, but half-vast competence. Okay, so that was a famous line from an efficiency report. Yeah. So the problem with the sophomore is vast enthusiasm, half-vast competence. But let's put it the other way. When I taught college, I tried to treat every question with utmost respect, because although I had heard the question 1,000 times, answered 1,000 times, for this young person, it was the first time the question occurred to them. The first time. Well, if this is true and that's true, how can they both be true? There's a sense of wonderment, a kind of a Socratic aporia. I've come to the end of my thinking. And I know, I'm a good pedagogue, and I love pedagogy, and I love when the student comes to the end, and I know there's a door that's going to be open, and when that door gets open, they are going to see Alibaba's cavern. They're going to see riches beyond belief once that door gets open. Then I want to carefully open that door. So I agree with you. I really try to treat all of my students and all of my classes with an understanding that they are on the precipice of majesty, and I am the person ushering them into a world of beauty. So the derisive term sophomore aside, I love teaching sophomores. It was some of my happiest time teaching was teaching Holocaust studies at USC to sophomores who came in so fresh and so ready to say, "Greatest good for the greatest number," and morality is all a construct. And I say, "Okay, let me give you a thought test." And they say, "Well, I guess it's not the greatest good for the greatest number, and I guess morality is not really relativistic. I don't believe that, and I'm ashamed that I actually ever said it. And I realized that every moral thought I've ever had in my life has been, corrupt and maybe even harmful." They don't say it, but as I conduct the class, and they say, "Okay, it's not greatest good for the greatest number, and it's not relative to society, because there are some things that I know are absolutely wrong in all places at all times. And you'd never say if 51% of the Germans thought it was a good idea to murder the Jews, is that the greatest good for the greatest number? Therefore, is it right?" And then I would watch that this kind of aporia of everything I've thought is wrong. What do I do now? And I thought, well, welcome to the world of moral complexity. And although I taught a Holocaust course, the reactions I got from students, it was the single most important course they had ever taken. And for years and years, because I taught so many hundreds, I'm going to say thousands of students over 10 years, wherever Meirav and I would be in Los Angeles, we'd be at some fair or the supermarket, some person would come up to you and say, "You're Professor Finley, aren't you?" I say, "Yes, guilty." They say, and they would just wax eloquent on that course, and not because of Holocaust. It's because I taught them to think morally with great precision for the rest of their lives. So it's an incredible zechut, it's an incredible privilege to bring people into the openness of what I'm going to call good, complex, moral, let's say, cogitation, how to cogitate well through a moral issue. Hey, Matthew, nice to see you. What I do, I'm not recommending this to anybody, but what I do, I read Nietzsche. Because Nietzsche's, I didn't plan to say that, I just said it. But Nietzsche's the thinker that says, don't trust systems. Don't trust any systems of thought that someone prepared for you, like you're going to try it on, it's going to fit. At some point, you're going to have to weave your own spiritual, intellectual, and moral garments. And so I write a few lines of Nietzsche where he just says, more or less, don't trust systems. We're alone here. We're going to have to plow through this and create meaning in worlds that seem inhospitable to meaning. So I like to read, even Walter Kaufmann's books on Nietzsche. I mean, if Nietzsche is a bit sounds a bit foreboding to you, Walter Kaufmann's book Critique of Religion and Philosophy. It's an old book. It's from the 1960s. I'm dating myself seriously here. I really haven't gone far beyond my library when I finished graduate school. But Rabbi Manning and I both have an intense love for the work of Walter Kaufmann and the early existentialists, because they know that we're thrown into a world that doesn't seem to inherently have meaning, and so therefore we are meaning creators. But then when you create meaning, then you find, as it were, the match of the meaning that we feel we have created that has been waiting for us and then comes down the road in our direction. You think you're forging a path, you're out there in the forest alone, and then meaning finds you. I sometimes, when people say they're seeking meaning, I said, the more you seek meaning, the more likely it is to find you. That's an inadequate answer, but I think it's the beginning of an answer. I hope that's okay with you. Oh, well, fantastic. Thank you. So I spent the past week reading the biography of Eisenhower by Stephen Ambrose. And it's such an interesting thing that a very simple middle America, Kansas kid suddenly finds his way from being an obscure major in the army to the greatest leader in post-war. So it's these the connective tissue is I'm hearing that I'm going to watch some kind of genius chef who is no.
He is a genius, but he comes from a middle-class family, and he's pushed to perfection because of the craziness and chaos.
That's what I'm saying. Pushed to perfection in craziness and chaos, right? So the minute you said it, I thought to myself, I looked at Eisenhower and said, he says, it's not obvious we're going to win this war. It's not obvious at all. We're fighting a very formidable enemy, and we are disorganized and don't get along with each other. And in spite that we all speak English, we don't speak the same language. We don't agree on military. He said it's all a shamble. Anyway, so that was my riff from Bear and Eisenhower. So I hope you don't mind that my immediate connective tissue of kind of sympathetic experience. But anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to